Hey, this is Kevin with My Shop Assist. Today I'm going to go over some changes we made to the QuickBooks integration. And in addition to that, it does some stuff such as saving invoices that becomes an invoice history. This has been the biggest change we've made in probably about a year. And it took us a while to develop it, but it's really, really fantastic for shops that do larger projects like restoration shops, hot rod shops, race car shops that are doing like chassis builds. And so I kind of get right into it here. So if I go into a job, and this is a vehicle that I have at the shop here that I bought to fix and then sell. I'm just kind of tracking all the time and all the parts on it. So what we've got is, if you go to the work order, it used to be an export button here, and that was what would export it to QuickBooks. We open this up into a separate window, and it looks quite complicated, but it's pretty easy to use. So there's a bunch of stuff in here. The first thing you'd want to do is say, hey, you know what, this is a job. If I want to export it, you just click Invoice, and if you just click this Export Invoice, it'll export the entire thing into QuickBooks. And I can do that for you, and you'll see exactly what it does. It creates a line here. This is an invoice history. It's thinking as it exports to QuickBooks. Okay, so I exported it and I got an error. And so this is one of the things that makes it easy to do is if you click on the little X, it tells you why it failed. So in this case, I have it as myself, and I am also an employee on QuickBooks. So you can't have a customer and an employee the same in QuickBooks. So what we got to do is we're going to have to go back into the job. We're going to have to change the name slightly different. So that way we don't have this problem anymore. So Kevin, my middle initial. Let's see if that makes it happy. So go back to the invoices, and this time I'm going to just click the update button here. So we can either update or update will, this is a copy of this in MSA. If we click update, it will just update this copy. It does not export it. If you click the little cloud, it will re-export it again. So we're going to try it again, and it's thinking. It's going to do the whole thing again. Okay, so this one exported successfully because we changed the name and doesn't match an existing QuickBooks user. And there are other options here as well. So we can import payments. So if you had payments in QuickBooks already and you wanted to pull them into MSA, you could click this button and it will fetch the payments out of QuickBooks and put them into MSA for you. Updating the invoice, like I already said, if you had made changes to the job and you just want to update it, you can just click this update button and it will update this invoice here. If you want to see the invoice, you just click the view button and it will show you what the invoice looks like. So we save these all off as you go. So you can get lots and lots and lots of these, especially on a progress billing job or a restoration where you have 2 or 3 years of work, and every month you bill a customer, you're going to have 30 invoices on here. You can also download the PDF if you have to email it to somebody. Email the invoice to somebody if you need to. And every one of these is archived. So if you ever needed to go back and somebody had a question about, January 2023 and you had that invoice, you could just email it to them, send them the PDF. And you can also, this also works for authorizations. So if you go into the authorization box and you sign it, it will create a copy of that as well. So if I go back to the invoices, see I have another line here, and this is it'll save the copy of this job here. So if I view it and scroll to the bottom, it has my signature on what was authorized. So that is another way of another thing that we save in here. When it has been emailed, the little email box here will show up as green, just like how the authorization signature pad here shows up as green. So this is not much different from just exporting a single job, but where it becomes really powerful is when you are doing large projects. So let's say this is a multi-year large project, and we want to do progress billing. So we already had this function in here before, where you could come in here and you could select a date range. So we'll do January 1st to January 31st. And if you click the filter button, it will show you only the labor and parts that you added in that time frame, rather labor that you've either time that you've ran or a fixed price task that was completed within this date range. And so in this case, it's mostly just parts. So I got the car and I added all the parts to the job immediately. And so it's like $4,000 in parts. So in the previous version, you would click this export button, you'd export as new, but there was always a problem with the invoice number being like duplicated, and it made it a lot harder to export jobs to QuickBooks when you were doing the date range filters. So if I go into the invoice now here, you can see my date range filters are still here. I can now change the invoice number here on the fly as I go. So we could call this 10451A, and it's going to export just this date range, and we'll click the export invoice right now, and it's going to make another line item here. It's going to show me the invoice number. It's going to show me the date range that this export is for, the amount it was for, and once it's completed here, it will have a export date. Okay, so now it's completed. So now we've got January exported to QuickBooks. Let's do the same thing for February. Okay, February now. Filter it, and we'll change it to B. And we will export this invoice. See, this is a slightly different total, 3903.56, export total. So it's going to make another line in here. So now we've got 2 months worth, and we've got the full job. So obviously you wouldn't be doing the monthly, progress billing and the full job. This is just kind of an example of how this works. You would either be doing one or the other. So either the whole entire thing, or you would be doing, individual time periods of this. And we can just keep going down the line here. So we do March. Filter it. Change the invoice number. And export again. And one thing to note, if you don't change the invoice number, it will look for an existing one and update it. So you got to be a little careful with clicking the export button, because it's going to use whatever invoice number you have here, look for it, match it, and update it if it already exists. So what that means is if you're doing the full job and you make some changes to the full job and you just come in here and click export again, it will just export the same invoice number and updates the previous invoice version of that same invoice number. So in this case, I keep using the letters to like A, B, C. You could do like Jan, Feb, March, whatever, and it would do the same sort of thing. And so the last one here, let's see, we got March. Let's go to April, and this would be the end of this job here. Filter, change it to D, export invoice. And one thing you'll note is this amount was negative, and so that one is not going to export. QuickBooks does not allow negative invoice amounts, but we do want to see why this is negative. So we're going to look at the I on here. This is an important thing to note on here. So you see there's two things on here. Tires and driver's seat purchases a pair. -1, -1. Well, if you go back and look at the job, there is no tire on here, and there is no, sorry, this is the date range filtered one, as of January, right? And so they were on here because I added them in January, the driver's seat pair and the tires. I added them in January, and then in April I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that quite yet, so I deleted them off the invoice. But when you're working on a large project like that, you already billed the customer in January, and then in April you decided you weren't going to use that part and go a different direction. So you have to reflect that in the invoices, and so we do. So if you go into January here, we have the parts in here. So we billed the customer for these driver's side seat and the tires, $1,800, right? We billed them for it. What we do now in MSA is we track inventory at the individual job level. So if you change a quantity, when you make that change, we reflect that on the invoice. So now when we go to April and look at this, we took those parts away. We removed them off the invoice. So it's a -1 quantity. -1 for the driver's seat, -1 for the tires. So we track that stuff, which is very, very important for progress billing. So now you don't have to worry about screwing up your books, your quantity on hand inventory stuff. And so this is all going to work out really well at the end. And then when you look at the complete job, it will show up as 0. The tires and the seat, you added them in January and then you took them away in April. So the quantity is going to be 0. So they're still on the invoice here. Okay, so that's kind of the gist of how this is going to work. For the most part, if you're just doing a single export, you just click this button. And if you need to update it, you just keep clicking the export invoice button and keep clicking it. And it will save off every iteration of it, but it's just going to keep maintaining the same invoice number. And when I go to QuickBooks on this thing, so let me log into QuickBooks, we can see every one of these invoices in here. So we've got the full job and then the 3 partial jobs, and then the April one wouldn't export because the amount was 0 or less than 0, so it was negative $900 or so. But yeah, that's how it's going to work, and should make it a lot easier to track progress billing jobs. Okay, the last part of this I want to go over is the payments and how we handle that on a job. So obviously we've had this for a while where you can add payments into a job. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a cash payment on here because it's easier for me to clear it out. Let's say we take a payment of $1,000 on this job. And let's say we took that payment in, I'm going to do February 29th. So that was like a partial payment of the February month. I'm going to save it. Okay, so if I go to the bottom of the job here, let's say we had a payment for $2,000 in January and $1,000 in February. The grand total was $9,000 and the remaining balance is $6,000. So we've got these payments on here. If we go back to the invoice page, you'll see at the bottom here is the payments. And so what I did was I applied the first payment, the $2,000 one in January, to the 10451A invoice, which was our January export. And let's say the second invoice I want to apply to the 10451B invoice. So if I click this and I select B, this invoice is now going to be associated with that. And I can export the payment to QuickBooks by clicking the cloud. So if I click this, it's going to export it into QuickBooks, and it's going to be applied to the 451B invoice. So we'll wait a second. And then we go into QuickBooks. And we find the 451B, edit the invoice. And you can see it has one payment made of $1,000 on it. So that's how this is going to work when you're doing payments. Basically, if you're doing an entire job, if you have a payment on here and hit export, it will ask you if you want to export the payment with it, and it will just export the entire job and whatever payments you have. If you're doing date range filtered invoice or progress billing, just export the date range you want, and then take the payment, apply it to the invoice you want, and export that separately. And that will link up the payments you have for the monthly bills you make for each customer. Pretty straightforward, easy to use. If you have any questions, just let us know or message me or call us. Thank you very much.